Now, who can say the change that occurred in my interior? Everything was horror for me. That love which I felt in me before I saw now changed into atrocious hate. What pain, not being able to love him anymore. The thought that the Lord, who had been so good to me, I was now forced to abhor, to curse, as if he were the most cruel enemy, tortured my soul. I could not look at him, even in his images, because in looking at them and holding rosary beads in my hands and kissing them, such rushes of hate came to me, and such force that doing that and reducing everything to pieces was the same. And sometimes I put up such resistance that my nature trembled from head to foot. Oh God, what a most bitter pain. I believe that if in hell there were no other pains, just the pain of not being able to love God would form the most horrible hell. Many times the devil would place before me the graces that the Lord had given me. Now, as crafting of my imagination, so that I would conduct a life more free, more comfortable, and now as true, and they reproached me by saying, "Is this the love he had for you? Is this the recompense, leaving you in your hands? You belong to us. You belong to us. Everything is over for you. There is nothing left to hope for." And I felt such rushes of indignation against the Lord and of desperation being cast into my interior, that many times if I found myself with some images in my hands, the force of the indignation was such that I would tear them apart. But while doing this, I would cry and kiss them. But I don't know how I was forced to do that. Now, who can say the torment of my soul? The demons made feast and laughed. Some would make noise from one point, some from another. Some would yell and shout, some would deafen me with screams, saying, "See how you belong to us? There is nothing left but taking you to hell, body and soul, and then you will see that what we will do to you." Sometimes I felt myself being pulled. Now my clothes, now the chair on which I was kneeling. They would move it and yell so much that I could not pray. And sometimes the fear that was such that, thinking I could free myself, I would go and lay down in bed, since then dins occurred mostly at night. But even there they would follow me, pulling the pillow and the blankets. Now who can say the fright, the fear I felt? I myself did not know where I was, whether on earth or in hell. The fear that they would really take me away was such that I could no longer close my eyes to sleep. I was like one who has a cruel enemy who has sworn to take his life away at any cost, and I believed that this would happen to me as soon as I would close my eyes. Therefore, I felt as if someone put something inside of them in such a way that I was forced to keep them wide open to see when they were going to take me away. Who knows? I might pluck up the strength to oppose what they wanted to do. I felt my hair stand on end, one by one over my head, a cold sweat throughout my whole person, which penetrated deep into my bones, and I felt my nerves and bones being disjointed one by one and wriggling about out of fear. Other times, I felt incited to such temptations of desperation and of suicide that sometimes, finding myself close to the well or to a knife, I felt drawn to throw myself into it or to take the knife and kill myself. The effort I had to make in order to run away was so great that I felt pains of death. And while running away, I felt them come after me, suggesting to me that it was useless for me to live after I had committed so many sins, and that God had abandoned me because I had not been faithful. Even more, I felt as if I had done many wicked deeds, which no soul in the world had ever committed. Therefore, for me, there was no more mercy to hope for. In the depth of my soul, I felt repeat, "How can you live as an enemy of God?" Do you know who that God is whom you have so much offended, cursed, and hated? Ah, that immense God who surrounded you everywhere, and you, under his very eyes, have dared to offend him? Ah, now that you have lost the God of your soul, who will ever give you peace? Who will free you from so many enemies? The pain was such that I did nothing but cry. Sometimes I would start to pray, and I would feel the demons come over me to increase my torment. And some would beat me, some would prick me, some would suffocate my throat. I remember that once, while I was praying, I felt my feet being pulled from underneath the earth, and the earth open, and flames come out, and I was sinking into it. The fright and the pain were such that I remained half dead. So much so that in order to make me recover from that state, Jesus Christ came and consoled me. He made me understand that it was not true that I had placed my will to offend him, and that I myself could know this from the most bitter pain that I felt, that the devil was a liar, and that I should not pay attention to him, that for now I had to have patience in suffering those bothers, and that later peace would come. This would happen from time to time, when I would really come to the extremes, and sometimes in order to put me into more bitter torments. In the act of that comfort, the soul would be convinced, because before that light, it is impossible for the soul not to learn the truth. But then, when I was in the fight, I would find myself in the same state as before. He also tempted me not to receive communion, persuading me that after I had committed so many sins, it was a boldness to go there, and that if I dared to, not Jesus Christ, but the devil would come, and would give me so many torments as to make me die. However, obedience would win. It is true that sometimes I suffered moral pains, such that I could hardly come around after communion, but since the confessor absolutely wanted me to receive it, I could not do otherwise. I remember that quite a few times I did not receive it. I also remember that sometimes, while I was praying in the evening, they would turn off the lamp. Sometimes they would let out such roars as to strike fear. Other times, feeble voices, as if they were dying. But who can say all that they would do? It is impossible. So, this hard trial, though I don't remember too well, lasted for 3 years. However, there were days or weeks of interval. It is not that they would cease completely, but they began to mitigate. I remember that, after one communion, the Lord taught me what to do in order to put them to flight, and this was to despise them and not to bother about them at all, and to consider them as if they were as many ants. I felt so much strength being infused in me that I no longer felt that fear of before, and I would act in this way. When they made clamors and noise, I would say to them, "It shows that you have nothing to do, and that in order to spend time you are doing so many silly things. Go ahead, do them, for when you get tired, you will stop it." Sometimes they would stop. Other times they would get so angry and would make greater noise. I felt them near me, making themselves stronger and doing violence to themselves in order to take me away. I smelled the horrible stench, and I felt the heat of the fire. It is true that in my interior I felt a certain shiver, but I would pluck up strength and say to them, "Liars that you are, if this were true, you would have done it from the first day. But since it is false, and you have no power over me but that which is given to you from above, go ahead, keep singing, and then when you get tired, you will croak." If then they set out laments and shouts, I would say to them, "What is this? You could not add to the accounts today? That is, have some souls been taken away from you, that you lament? Poor ones, they don't feel well, but I too want to make you lament a little more." And I would begin to pray for sinners, or to do acts of reparation. Sometimes I would laugh when they started to do the usual things, and I would say to them, How can I fear you, cowardly species? If you were serious, beings, you would not have done so many silly things. Don't you yourselves feel ashamed? Don't you let yourselves be made fun of? If then they tempted me with blasphemies or hatred against God, I would offer him that most bitter pain. That violence I made to myself in seeing that, while the Lord deserved all the love, all the praises, I was forced to do the opposite. In reparation for many who blaspheme against him freely, and who do not even remember that a God exists, whom they are obliged to love in return. If they incited me to desperation, in my interior I would say, I don't care either about hell or about paradise. What I care about is to love my God. This is not the time to think about anything else. Rather, it is time to love my good God as much as I can. Paradise and hell I place in his hands. He who is so good will give me what is best for me, and will give me a place in which I can glorify him the most. Jesus Christ taught me that the most effective means so that the soul would remain free of any vain apprehension, of any doubt, of any fear, was to protest before heaven, the earth, and the very demons, that she does not want to offend God even at the cost of her life, and that she does not want to consent to any temptation of the devil. And this, as soon as the soul feels the coming of the temptation, in the act of the battle, if she can, and as she begins to feel free, and also during the course of the day. By doing this, the soul will not waste time in thinking about whether she has consented or not, because the mere memory of the protest will already give her calm. And if the devil tries to disturb her, she will be able to answer that if she had the intention of offending God, she would not have protested the opposite. In this way, she will remain free of any fear. Now, who can say the range of the devil, since all his tricks resolved into confusion for himself, and there, where he thought he would gain, he would lose. And his very temptations and tricks were used by the soul in order to make acts of reparation and love for her God by acting in this way. The other way he taught me in casting away temptations was the following. If they tempted me to suicide, I was to answer, you have no permission from God. On the contrary, to your annoyance, I want to live, so as to be able to love my God more. If then they beat me and hit me, I was to humble myself, kneel, and thank my God, because this was happening as a penance for my sins. Not only this, but to offer everything as acts of reparation for all the offenses against God that were given in the world. Lastly, an ugly temptation that lasted for a short while was that, after being in continuous contact with demons so ugly for about 1.5 years, I would become pregnant and deliver a little demon with horns. My imagination would breed itself in such a way that I saw myself in a horrible confusion in the face of what people would say about me because of such an awful event. Finally, for about 1.5 years of this fight, the cruelties of the demons ceased, and a whole new life began. Although the demons did not stop molesting me from time to time, however, it was not so frequent, the battle was not so fierce, and I became used to despising them.